in Europe has ended. Unconditionally and finally, our German enemy has surrendered to the people of all free nations.
Italy rises from the rubble. The bombed cities, covered in painful silence, are soon alive again. People flood the streets chanting songs of freedom. The local dialects mix with the slang of the American soldiers. The merchants bring out their wares and cry out to passers-by from their ramshackle benches, selling 2 onions or a piece of bread. These are the sounds of rebirth after a long night of terror. This is the story of Salvatore Ferragamo, Shoemaker of Dreams. A podcast series from Cora Media for Museo Ferragamo. Episode 7, Feet and Celebrities. There's a lack of materials. Palazzo Spini Ferroni is damaged. The workers are discouraged and they can't keep up with their previous work pace. It's difficult for Salvatore to get his production started up again. But luck is on his side. He manages to snatch up a shipment of natural leather, as well as a ton of high-quality raffia from Madagascar. He needs to breathe life into his shoes again. And Italy is reborn also thanks to the effort of entrepreneurs like Salvatore, as Stefania Ricci tells us.
In
1945, Ferragamo writes an editorial which opens the November issue of the most important fashion magazine, Bellezza. In it, Ferragamo invites all fashion creators to start up production again and look towards the future with optimism after the dramatic years of war.
Following the end of hostilities, I would pore over several foreign magazines and publications trying to understand the state of footwear production by the most famous brands. And I couldn't help but notice a deep sense of poverty. Even in the wealthiest countries, meaning those that suffered less from the war, there had been no progress nor development in this regard. I realized that this state of affairs could be an opportunity for Italian manufacturers should they follow their needs and their pride, focus their energies, and pool all their talents and resources.
E nello stesso numero, poche pagine dopo, appare...
In that same issue, there is also an illustration by Riccardo Magni where the model of a tied Ferragamo shoe appears in the middle of the rubble of Florence, a symbol of how fashion wins, fashion survives, and as the symbol of an Italy that won't surrender.
The greatest assistance in overcoming these problems was the knowledge of the goodwill of my old customers. When at last I was able to start supplying them, many traveled across the country to my salon because of the difficulties of sending their shoes to them. Overseas buyers returned with orders, requests, and assistance in surmounting import restrictions. By the middle of 1946, my first shipments of shoes were going for export. By the beginning of 1947, I was again exporting to all European countries and the United States. Best of all, the feet came walking into my shop in a steadily swelling stream, and I was able to resume the task I loved the best, the diagnosing and fitting of the custom-made shoe.
In spring 1946, the company starts registering its first successes. They release a new line of children's footwear with a skid-proof sole, and in the course of the years, 9 Ferragamo shops are active in Italy. The balance of 1947 closes with a profit of about 1 million liras.
As the year 1946 gradually grew older and the technical difficulties of shortages and substitutes began to recede, I found a new surging of my creative powers. Perhaps it was partly due to the excitement of returning to the work I loved after so many years of illness and frustration. Partly it was due to the fruits of the research of those warriors when I had spent so many hours working out new applications of old materials and visualizing their uses in new styles and designs. At any rate, the rewards of my labors were not long in arriving.
In the summer of 1947, Salvatore receives a telegram from the Dallas branch of Neiman Marcus Warehouse. This is how he discovers that he's won the prestigious Neiman Marcus Award 1947 for distinguished service in the field of fashion. The Neiman Marcus Award was instituted in 1938 as a sort of Academy Award for fashion and is given every year to the best European designers. In 1947, Ferragamo wins the prize alongside Christian Dior, the greatest French fashion designer, Irene of Hollywood for a contribution to fashion and film, and Norman Hartnell, the Royal Tailor of England. On the 22nd of August 1947, Salvatore and Wanda board the Queen Elizabeth Transatlantic for New York, and from there to Dallas, Texas, to take part in the awards ceremony. Salvatore returns to America after almost 20 years. Wanda is going there for the first time. The crossing of the Atlantic is an event in itself. Each night is an elegant dinner. On board, they meet members of the Jet Society and movie stars. Christian Dior himself is also traveling with them.
Our first meeting had a curious sequel. I do not know whether Dior knew of my work before he read it in the list of awards. I must confess that until that moment, he was not even a name to me. I do not read fashion news. We spent a good deal of time at our first meeting in a good-natured grumble at the incidental disadvantages of winning an international prize. It had meant hard work creating new styles to present at the mannequin parade, which was a feature of the ceremony. Dior confessed that he had completed his dresses only a few days before he sailed. My shoes had not been finished until a week earlier.
At this point, Dior asks to see his shoes. They go down to the cabin where Salvatore lays out his creations. Dior is speechless. He suspects that the shoemaker already knew which dresses he would be putting on show in Dallas. But Salvatore assures him he hasn't seen his models. Indeed, he didn't even know who Christian Dior was.
Well, he said, I don't know how it's happened, but I've got the dresses and you've got the shoes. They might have been designed in cooperation.
Salvatore, seeing the Dior models himself, is just as impressed.
It seemed fantastic. For instance, to quote only two examples, Dior had designed a dress lined with satin and with a new style of cutaway neck. One of my shoe styles was of satin, lined with satin, and the vamp was cut away to show the instep in precisely the same fashion as Dior's neckline. The second pair of shoes was made with two drapes only. Dior had designed a dress with two drapes.
Stefania Ricci describes the most incredible model created by Salvatore for the Neiman Marcus Award.
Fra le scarpe che Salvatore porta con sé.
In Salvatore's selection, we also find the invisible sandals, made of a wooden wedge, shaped into an F like Ferragamo's surname, covered in goatskin or suede, and with a transparent string of nylon that passes from one side to the other of the plant, made with a simple fishing line, a new post-war invention.
Salvatore gets the idea of using fishing line when he meets a worker coming back from fishing on the Arno River. The worker shows him the big fish he's just caught and explains how he could catch it using a new type of line made of nylon. The fish can't see it.
Il modello dell'invisibile, nonostante
The invisible model goes against Ferragamo's principle of comfort, which is why it's often worn with satin or goatskin socks. But it's acclaimed by the international press and published in all the fashion magazines of the time. The cost of the sandal is very high, about $29.75, which in perspective is the same price for 4 tons of coal.
the invisible sandal, along with the other models, makes the show a triumph. Salvatore receives his award, and as Wanda tells us in her memoirs, he's so overwhelmed that it's all he can do to whisper a timid "thank you" as the audience applauds him. Back in Italy, he expresses his gratitude to the workers that have helped him out through the years by giving them 5 kilos of sugar each, a true luxury at the time. Salvatore knows the importance of his workers' hard work, and they'll need to keep up with a constantly growing production. Despite being well on the path of industrial production, craftsmanship and the creation of tailor-made shoes is still the heart of his job. By now, Salvatore is a point of reference in the world of fashion, not only for the beauty and comfort of his shoes, but also for his skill in getting in touch with the wishes and needs of each of his clients. The purchase of a shoe itself becomes an experience for the body and mind.
What do I mean when I say that feet talk to me? Just that. They communicate the character of the person. Let a nervous woman place her foot perfectly relaxed into my hand, and I know at once that she is nervous because a current powerful as a small electric shock passes through her feet to my palm. These impressions received through the foot enable me to supplement my visual impressions of how I must deal with my customers. Sometimes I find them more reliable than my eyesight and my hearing. The feet do not lie.
Elvira Valeri introduces us to Salvatore's library, where there are a few essential volumes to understanding the inspiration to his philosophy of touch.
La biblioteca di Salvatore Ferragamo.
Salvatore Ferragamo's library teaches us a lot about the way he sees the world and life, as well as the culture and philosophy which support his creativity. The volumes on his shelves, each with his quotes and annotations, speak to a lesser-known but equally important aspect of the shoemaker. They show an articulated and original reflection on the body, in which the aspect of tactile sensation is essential. Probably inspired by John Locke's essay on human understanding, a text found in his library and from one of the greatest empiricists of the 18th century, which speaks of the relationship between the organ of feeling and the object being felt. There's a constant and reciprocal dialogue between the two. To touch is to read, to understand, to connect the many elements of reflection between science and life.
The size of your feet, too, tells me about your character. I have divided the women who have come to me into 3 categories: the Cinderella, the Venus, and the aristocrat. The Cinderella takes a shoe smaller than size 6. The Venus takes size 6. The aristocrat, a 7 or larger. The Cinderella, I have observed, is essentially a feminine person, a lover of jewels and furs, who must be in love to be truly happy. Venus is usually of great beauty, glamour, and a sophistication, yet under her glittering exterior, she's often essentially a homebody, loving the simple things of life. The aristocrats are sensitive, even moody, but possess a great depth of understanding.
Salvatore sees as Cinderellas Betty Davis, Carmen Miranda, Gina Lollobrigida, Marlene Dietrich, and Evita Peron. As Venus, Rita Hayworth, Eva Braun, and Queen Elizabeth. As aristocrats, Eleonora Duse and Sophia Loren, Audrey Hepburn and Ingrid Bergman, Greta Garbo and Lauren Bacall. But these are just a few of the famous feet that Salvatore dressed. The list of famous clients is never-ending, and this is recorded in the company historical archive. Here, we can also find thousands of shoes and other brand products, as well as the wooden shoe molds of foot measurements, the orders, the receipts, and the photographs, which in most cases capture the image of Salvatore while he kneels and holds the feet of a celebrity in his hands.
What are these famous people like? And what styles do they prefer? The Duchess of Windsor, small and charming, always chooses a classic line. Gloria Swanson, too likes the classical line. Claretta Petacci loved beautiful shoes more than any other item of dress. She possessed more pairs of shoes than gloves or stockings. Rita Hayworth loves her feet and has always been faithful to my shoes, especially during those periods when she had been expecting her babies. In order not to damage her feet, she chooses at these times nothing but wedges, especially made for her. Queen Elena of Italy used to send for me, and I would travel up to Rome to see her at the palace. On one visit, she questioned me about my life, and when I told her scraps of it, she became intensely interested. After that, her requests for my attendance at the palace became more frequent, and her questions about my career more searching, until I sometimes wondered whether she wanted me at the palace to make her new shoes or to tell her another installment of my life story. Greta Garbo has beautiful feet, and I imagine that her preference for low-heeled shoes reflects an intense desire to preserve her feet against any possible damage.
In an interview with the newspaper Corriere della Sera, Wanda admits that she was wildly jealous of the beautiful women that surrounded her husband. The granddaughter Ginevra Visconti says that at Palagio, Salvatore would conserve large blow-ups of some stars, such as Greta Garbo and Jean Harlow. On each there was a dedication, to Salvatore with love. Wanda didn't appreciate it, so she hatched a tiny revenge, as she tells her own granddaughter. One day, returning home for breakfast, Salvatore couldn't find me. On each of the chairs of the dinner table, there was the cardboard image of an actress with a note, "Did you enjoy yourself? Well, eat with them instead." Our loyal servant brought them all out to the dumpster, as he feared they would start a family argument. Years later, when preparing an exhibition of the life of Salvatore, Wanda tells us that she's truly regretted losing those photographs. They would have been yet another document of the relationship between Salvatore and the stars of the time. After the war, Salvatore's rise and the success of his brand are unstoppable. It's the 29th of November 1950 when Salvatore is celebrated with 13 of his models being displayed alongside ceramics, glass, furniture, fabrics, and other objects of Italian craftsmanship at the Brooklyn Museum of New York for the exhibition Italy at Work, her Renaissance in Design Today. The exhibition is a testament to the Renaissance of Italian design, not only in architecture, but in artisanship as well.
Le creazioni di Ferragamo.
The creations of Ferragamo at this time perfectly incarnate the new Renaissance, which is exactly the term used in America to define it. Ferragamo's design is perfectly in line with the culture of materials and skills of artisanship. In these years, in 1949, the artist Pietro Annigoni paints the famous portrait of Salvatore Ferragamo, where the shoemaker is depicted as a painter and as the most authentic essence of craftsman artist, the Renaissance man.
Giovan Battista Giorgini is a buyer and promoter to Italian fashion in the world, and he'll ask Salvatore to make the shoes for the first Italian fashion show in his house of Via dei Serragli.
Per la prima sfilata di moda italiana.
For the fashion show at Giorgini's house on February the 12th, 1951, Salvatore Ferragamo creates a special sandal for Emilio Schubert's clothes. It is a high-heeled goatskin sandal, a sabot model without a heel, to be worn with a leather or satin sock in contrast with a contrasting color called kimo, a combination of the Japanese tabi, the famous sock worn with traditional Japanese sandals, and inspired by the soled stockings of the 15th century. This shoe represents the essence of Italian fashion in these years, based on the multifunctionality of certain items of clothing. The kimo's feature is that of having as many shoes as possible, for as many outfits as possible, with just the purchase of a single sandal. Salvatore Ferragamo will work on this even more in the future, in a series of new inventions such as sandals with the so-called cage heel, where interchangeable sheaths can be attached to the cage, creating several types of footwear.
di calzature.
To an observer who in 1950 might have idly taken stock of my situation, it might well have appeared that I had reached a broad, unruffled highway along which I could travel only from success to success. I controlled a working force of 700 men and women, making 350 pairs of handmade shoes a day. I had stuck to my guns and to my principles, and the dream born in the days of Hollywood had at last come true in all its facets, almost exactly as I had imagined it.
But Salvatore has many times shown that in his career, he's able to look beyond. He knows that he can't remain stuck in the present, but he needs to imagine the future of his company.
The future swirled treacherously. The machine age, which I had fought so long and so far successfully, was advancing remorselessly. It might seem reasonable to continue replacing my retiring workers with new young ones. The threat of the future was that there were no young ones.
Salvatore fears that artisanship is on the way out, cast aside by the deluge of mass production.
Unless something was done, and done quickly, it might die through the failure of my business and for lack of imitators.
Every turn in history brings with it new roads. Salvatore finds himself once again forced to walk down unknown paths. You have listened to a podcast by Cora Media for Museo Ferragamo, written by Rosella Bettinardi, editing by Davide Savelli. Executive producer is Lia Chiovari. English version translated by John Vincent Aquilecchia, with the participation of Stefania Ricci, Elvira Valleri. Voice of Salvatore Ferragamo, Eric Alexander. Narrator, Caterina Yuca Sforza. Voice of Stefania Ricci, Liliana Oliveri. Voice of Elvira Valleri, Jenny Elizabeth Kuehl. For Museo Ferragamo, editorial supervision by Stefania Ricci and Ludovica Barabino. Editorial coordination by Paola Gusella. Sound and music supervision by Luca Micheli. Sound engineer Luca Possi. Post-production and sound design by Cosma Castellucci.